So I'm going to open up, I'm not even going to open anything up right now. I'm just going to make a blank file. One of the important things to kind of keep in mind is that the same process we did for this setup is the same thing that you will typically repeat over and over and over again when you do something that is like this. Okay, so when we do our next project, which is a candy jar, we're going to have a very similar setup as far as lights go, as far as the look of it goes, where we're going to be doing that little swooping background where we're going to have a couple lights in the front. So it's a good thing to kind of keep in the forefront of your mind of how to do all that stuff. So in my case, I'm just kind of building something very quickly just so you can see that whole process again. You can see how I've created an object. I've created this plane that I'm going to just extrude or even just pull up. That'll work too. And how I'm going to scale it up. Now, one of the pitfalls that people fall into is not thinking big enough, not thinking about what this is going to look like in the end. Now, I've scaled up this thing pretty big. I've made the top one really tall. I've made the front one really forward, and the side one's really far out. If this is too tiny like that, sure, it works and we can see it, but if you look at the edges of it, you can see the edges. And what that does is it takes your brain out of the real world and puts you in 3D, okay? Obviously, we're working in 3D, but we don't want people to just right away assume that we're working in 3D. So we always want this stuff to be nice and big so we can't see that kind of thing. Even when we choose our camera angles, we don't want to choose a camera angle that's going to show those corners, okay? Because again, it gives it into that sense of being fake. Now, if this was something that we just wanted to kind of have floating around, in this case, it doesn't really make sense that our text would be just floating around like that. But we could have it just floating around, and sometimes that would even look better. But by doing this, we lose stuff like shadows and reflections. So it's a little bit more tricky to light and to make it look nice. Okay. When we create our lights, I'm going to create a light. We created an area light. Remember, we did that because it is the most realistic looking light. Oops. There we go. Okay, I'm just going to position this here. There we go. And then when I hit the render button, bless you.
Thank you.
This is what we have so far. Okay. Now my default renderer popped up as mental ray. One thing you always have to be aware of is what it's rendering through. Sometimes this will default to Maya software, and the quality of it is not going to be as nice. You can see that's the Maya software look. Now, if I came to your station and I saw that you had a light and you were getting this result, without even looking at the top, I would know that you're rendering with Maya software just because of the look of it. You can see that if we look at the edges of this, see how much nicer the edges look, and then obviously we have a shadow, which we didn't have before. So the two kind of like giveaways that we're rendering with Maya software over mental ray. Okay, so we always want to render with mental ray in this class. All right, now this stuff here, all this noise that's back there, all these like little dots where it doesn't really look like a nice smooth shadow, those will go away. Okay, but remember, we work with very, very rough, very, very crude stuff, and then we gradually refine it until we get to the end where then it starts to look much, much nicer. All right, so on this light, I have a couple options that are always set, okay? I always choose Quadratic Decay, okay? So I'm always choosing Quadratic Decay. This controls the drop off from the light surface to the object itself. Because I have Quadratic Decay, I have to turn up the intensity. I always go to mental ray, and I always use light shape. I always set this high sample to 1, and I always turn it on to visible. Okay, now that rendering right there may be nicer, it may be darker, it may be brighter, it may be whatever. So far it looks like a pretty decent rendering still. Okay. So I'm going to pull this back a little bit. If we look at this light, you can see right here I have this big blown out area. Okay, that's because my light is too close to the ground. That's another thing that people don't pay attention to is, I look at the object and I say, hey, that object looks nice, but you don't pay attention to the other stuff in the scene. So some things from this that are bothering me, how black it is back here looks too fake. how black this is here, how bright that is there. It's just like too much stuff going on. So I'm going to fix a couple of those. I'm going to fix all of them, hopefully. One, I'm going to pull my light further away. Okay, and because I pulled it further away, I'll make it a little bit bigger. Now it'll still blow out this area. It's too close to that area, but I don't care because I'm going to be right here. I'm going to be very close to my object, so I'm not going to see that being blown out. Don't try to look at your whole scene from every angle to see what's going to look good. Look at it from the angle you're going to see it at, okay? So I'm going to see it from probably this close up. That's still too dark, so I come to my intensity and crank it up. So that's what I want to look at it as, is this close, not far away. There you go. So now I fixed two things. I fixed the bright spot that we had here. I've also fixed that dark area back there. By pulling my light back further, I'm introducing more light into my scene. That gets rid of all the dark areas, okay? Now I do have some darkness happening here and there. So I can fix that, oops, by just grabbing my light. I hit T to pull up that manipulator, and then I just duplicate it and pull this part over, okay? And I'm also gonna pull it back a bit too. Okay, pulling it back a bit will allow that light to be softer, okay? So I don't have two lights the same intensity, same distance, hitting my object. It'll wash it out, and my object will look very flat. By having one here and one further back, or one here and one here, but this one's dimmer, will allow me to control my lighting and still have shape to my object. There you go. So now if we look at that, that looks much nicer. It looks like an actual like nice little sphere sitting on the ground. Okay. Now if I take this intensity up, just so you can see that too, let me take this up to maybe 45. I like to hit this button here because this will save your rendering. If I save it, then I can look at the previous one. Okay, so I've saved it, and I can look at the previous one. You can see how by brightening that up a little bit, I'm starting to wash out the ball. I'm losing some of the roundness right here in the center. I'll make it even more bright so we can really see it. 65. If you have too many lights in your scene and they're all the same intensity, you will like wash out your object. So it no longer looks 3D. It's just going to look like a circle, like a 3D circle in there. Okay? And it is something you have to play with. It's not something you're going to get right away. You have to play with it in order to get the correct look. All right. Now the other thing I'm going to pay attention to is this. If I shrink this down like that, I'll do the same thing with this guy. Shrink that one down like that. What I'm going to get when I shrink these lights down are those shadows are now going to be super crisp. Okay. You don't want super crisp shadows for every single light. If you do have multiple lights in your scene, here and wherever else, every light can't have shadows like that because it'll just drive the viewer crazy. Just to illustrate this even further, this is, you know, stuff that I see, and I just don't want you to fall into that same thing. Come on. So there's another light, and I'll duplicate this. There's another light, and I'll duplicate this, and there's another light. There we go. So there's a bunch of lights in my scene. And this will really wash out my scene probably, but hopefully we'll be able to illustrate the point of we don't want every light to have its own shadows. Way too washed out. Let's grab some of these lights and just dim them a bit. 15,000. That should be sufficient. There we go. So now if you look at the lights, or you look at the shadows from this, the lighting actually looks pretty good overall, but look at the shadows. There's like shadows all over the place, okay? And what happens is, if this ball were animated, all those shadows would be going all over the place, because just like in the real world, shadows would move with the object. So we don't want that stuff to happen. We don't want all these lights to have all these different shadows. So if I grab the lights and I make them bigger, that spreads out the shadows, making the shadows appear softer. Okay. Now I may keep one smaller to say that I want a hard shadow for this specific light, but my other lights I want it to be nice and soft. Okay, or I want one to be a little bit more emphasized. Doesn't look too bad. I don't know why I'm getting, oh, I never hit 3. There we go. So I hit 3 on my ground just so I can get a nice curved background instead of that one. So now let's look at that again. There you go. So that looks like a pretty pleasant looking thing. Even with that many lights, you can see there wasn't a huge difference in having the 2 lights there or having a multitude of lights. The biggest difference is right down here, 17 seconds, okay? So adding that many lights, this is taking 17 seconds to render. Not a huge deal, but compared to right here when we were at 8 seconds, it's basically double, okay? So if it's gonna take you 2 hours, it's now gonna take you 4 hours. If it was gonna take you 4 hours, now it's gonna take you 8 hours to render. Okay, so just some stuff to keep in mind as you go. I actually like it with this. I'm going to keep those extra lights in there. All right, now let's look at our colorations here. Okay, so I'm going to put a material on here. Remember that we're using MIAs for everything. MIA material X passes. There's a search bar up here. Anytime you see a little search bar, it's best use the search bar. It's much easier than trying to figure out in this huge list where that material is. Okay, now you could even say, you know what, I want to use this MIA material for everything that I'm doing. I hate having to keep typing it in because I just hate typing stuff. There is, under here, there's a favorite. Okay, Blend, Lambert, all of these, MIA is not included. So when I go to my new material, I'm going to right click on my MIA and say add to favorites. So now when I go to lighting and shading and I go to favorites, look what's in the list. MIA material X passes, okay? Now again, Maya lets you customize so much stuff, figure out these areas that it can kind of speed things up. So I'm gonna do what most people do, which is just pick a color. Perfect, there we go. And we'll do the same thing to the ground. Favorite material, MIA. And I'm labeling these, which is something people don't do. Make sure your stuff is labeled. Make sure your stuff is organized. And I'll pick a somewhat nicer color for the background. Okay. So now I picked a red and I picked this other color. I'm going to render it and we're going to see a typical result. Now I want you to tell me what's wrong with this picture. Reflected light, right? That's one thing. Very shiny. Everything has reflections. I have not adjusted a single reflection inside here. So again, consider what these objects might be made of, and that will help you kind of dictate what the object's reflectivity should be. So right now the ball looks like it might be a metallic ball, right? It might have had some sort of clear coat or some sort of shine to it. And so that's not terribly too bad. But then we look at the floor, and the floor also looks really shiny. So somehow this surface that we're using is like a reflective white color, and we don't want that, okay? So we always want to come into these and adjust them. So I'm going to go to my ground, and I can pull the reflectivity down. And I also don't want to just pull it down because that'll just lighten it, okay? And instead of this reflection here being super red, it'll basically just like lighten that red. So it just blends it in more. I also want to spread it out. So that's what the glossiness is for. I take the glossiness down, and that will spread out this red color. So what we should see now is that we have some reflection, some glossiness, that just kind of spread out a little bit more. So it looks a little bit softer. It looks a little bit more plasticky, or plasticky, that's the perfect word. Okay, and you can definitely see there's a tiny hint of red right there. I can see it a little bit clearer on my screen. A tiny hint of red right inside there where the ball is sort of reflective, but it's not going crazy, okay? And ideally that's what we would want, because what it also does, what it also gives us, is a little bit of faked bounce light, okay? Our lights hit the object, they should bounce off and have a little bit of bleed of red right on here, but we don't have that, so this kind of helps fake it, okay? Now I can go into the ball and adjust some of the ball properties, or adjust some of these light properties here. So one thing I can do for the light, and we've talked about this before, is I could take this plane here and maybe not extend it so far. Okay, maybe pull this in a little bit more because we don't see this edge. And take a look and see if that now is, we don't have that big white spot going down the middle of the ball. Okay, it definitely looks like that white spot is gone because the lights are no longer hitting the ground. The ground isn't getting super hot. It actually is still a little bit. And then it's bouncing into that. Okay, so I can see what that is. I don't need to keep rendering it. So again, I could pull that a little bit closer. And these are all checks that I like to do right before I render, because if your rendering does take, let's say it takes 8 hours to render, you don't want to have to wait 8 hours to find out that you've made a mistake. You want to find out right away so that you can fix it right away. There you go. It's still a little hot in the center, but I'm not terribly upset about that. It looks much nicer than it did before. Okay, now another thing that's bothering me, I don't know if it's bothering you guys, but this area of blackness right here, that's basically where there's nothing, okay? We have our plane right here that's kind of curved, and the ball's sitting right there, but then out here is nothing. So that's what it's reflecting in, is nothing. So remember from one of the earlier examples I did, where we had these spell things correctly, HDRI. Yes. I'm thinking of HDMI. I got confused. So we have these HDRIs that we can use. Now again, we don't want to just grab one of these because none of these really belong to us. We want to go to the search tools and find one that we can reuse with modification. Okay? So one of these guys here, we can actually use in our image to kind of enhance what it looks like. Now this is a typical one that you would see. See how it's like so wide like this and so tall like that? And there's actually like this little like wave that you can see kind of like right here, this wave. That's what we're looking for, okay? This right here has this like wave right there. That's what we're looking for, okay? So I like this one. That one might be a good one to use. So I'm gonna view the image. I'm going to save the image. I'm going to figure out where I've set my project. There. Text logo, perfect. Okay, so I'm gonna put that into my folder on the P drive. And I put it inside of source images, okay? There we go. So now when I come into Maya, I'm gonna go into my render settings. Okay, this little gear with the clapper, and under my scene, I can say I want image-based lighting, okay? And that's what that's gonna do, is that's gonna use that image to help add a little bit more environment to my scene instead of it just being just like this plain scene. So I find my image, there it is. And then I close my stuff. I'm just checking some other stuff. Yep, okay. So now when I hit the render button, what we should get is instead of that black area, we should have some environment kind of bouncing through. There we go. So now it gives our scene a little bit more realism, okay? Because now it looks like we're actually somewhere, okay? Instead of just being in the middle of this flat area doing whatever, okay? Now for some scenes, you probably do want to have the blackness inside there. You can barely see that. There it is, okay? So for some scenes, you'd want to have the black and the white, but with this one, I liked having something else inside the scene because it just makes it look a little bit more interesting. If this is too clear, this image that I downloaded right here, I could actually open this up in Photoshop and just do a big blur on it, just a big Gaussian blur, and it'll soften the entire image, and it'll make this appear a lot softer. So again, that's another way that we can enhance the image without giving it too much detail. Like let's say I chose one of these random ones like like that. You know, it wouldn't make much sense for our ball to be in the middle of this, where here it actually seems like it makes a little bit more sense, or even something like that. All right, so just blurring it could definitely help just kind of add to a little bit more of the realism. Okay, now I'm also getting, if you look, I'm getting these square shapes here. Those are all my lights. So if I don't want my lights to show up, I can grab the light and say visible 0. Just turn off my visibility, or turn off some of them. I may only want 1 or 2 of them to show up. That's a possibility too. Now they're still going to light up our stuff. This is just visible in reflections. Visible is a regular surface. It is an object. Okay, so now they're all turned off. So I'll save this one. I'll render it again. And then you'll see what we're going to get instead of that is we're going to get these little blurs, okay? Even though the light's intensity is off, we're still getting this kind of look. We're still getting some whiteness here of where our light is actually coming from. So just be aware that we can turn things off, we can enhance things, we can do whatever. We're still going to get that kind of look. Now, just out of curiosity, I wonder if I made this visible but turn that to 0, will that do anything? No, they got rid of it. Haha. All right, so I can do that too. Some things that you do inside of 3D or inside of any of these programs, just a lot of it is just trying to work the system, trying to push the values to get what you want.
How do I break this?
Right. There we go. So now, if all goes to plan, then we should have nothing back there except for our other reflections. And they're there, they're just black. They don't look as obvious, right? They don't look as, they were kind of standing out a little bit before, but now it kind of makes a little bit more sense of what they're doing there, okay? Our lighting stayed the same. It was just that reflection that was a bit different. Okay, so this looks wonderful, okay? So now I'm just gonna add a little animated camera. We've done this before, but just so you can see it again, I make a new camera. Okay, right now I'm looking through a camera. I'm in perspective, which is what that is. When I make a new camera, now I'm in perspective 1. Okay, and so everything I do here is just inside this other camera. So I'm just going to start off down here. I'm going to take my focal length down to like 20. There we go. And I'm at frame 1. Too far in. There we go. I'm going to hit S to set a key. I'm going to go to frame 120, put where I want my end frame to be, right there. Gorgeous. Okay, so there's my animation. Now again, you can obviously tweak your animation, but you have to keep in mind you want things to be as realistic as possible. So thinking about this in the real world, how would you move a camera? You would just most likely pan out, or you'd move over, or you'd zoom in and out. And we said before, we don't like cameras where people are like, I like this angle, and then I like maybe this angle, and then I like this angle here, and then this angle back here to show everything, right? Because now we're going to get this. And that does not look like a real camera move, okay? And this is, again, this is stuff that people don't think about at render time or before they render. They think about it afterwards when they see the results, and it's just too much, okay? Now this is actually going pretty slow. Let me take this into real time so we can see. I mean, it's pretty close to real time, but so we can see what it's going to look like. Okay, so this is 24, 30 frames. Let's do 30 frames a second. There we go. Okay, so this is 30 frames a second. This is how fast this is going to go. It's going to give someone a headache to have to watch this. So every camera we do, we keep it very subtle and very smooth. Okay, so I've deleted all my middle keys. I just have it go from point A to point B. Now it did look like it kind of did something weird there. Nope, just my imagination. All right. Now, if I wanted something else to happen, or I wanted to show this from a different angle, I wouldn't try to fit it all inside one camera. What I would do is make another camera, okay? Maybe I have another camera that I wanted to add, where I do start at the top like this, rewind it, set my focal length. There we go. Very dramatic. And I set it at 1, I go to 120. I set it to 120 right there. Okay. So now we're coming down and doing one of those numbers. Okay. So now I have two cameras. Perspective 1 does one thing, perspective 2 does something else. And inside of After Effects, I could take these two clips and put them side to side and do cuts between them and do something that looks more like something that would be from the real world. Okay. Now as I do my animations, I have to keep in mind all the stuff that I talked about before. Look over here, there's a tiny sliver of that background kind of cutting out. So that when I render this, we're probably going to see that if I render it through the correct camera, perspective 2. Okay, you also want to look at where your ball is. Sometimes if your ball is just a hair off the ground and you have a little gap there, you can see the shadow, and then that looks kind of funky. So definitely look at this. It looks very weird. There's like nothing up here. Okay, so that's definitely something I wouldn't want to keep right inside there. So I'd want to make sure that I've adjusted my camera so I don't see that little area up there. Okay. Good. All right. So now that all those things have been checked, I've looked at my lighting, I've looked at my shadows, I've looked at reflections, I've looked at the animation, I've looked at my overall scene, I've checked my cameras to make sure they're good. Now it's actually time to go through and render this thing out. Okay. So I'm going to go into that render settings again, and this is from the first one on. It's pretty much not self-explanatory, but it's pretty much like walk you through what you need to change. Okay, just reading them will kind of help. So file name prefix, what do you think that's going to be? Something that comes out of it, right? So when we render stuff out, it's going to be going somewhere. This is the name of it. So right now it's just not set, it's using the scene name. So my scene is called Untitled. So if I were to render this, it would be called Untitled. Okay? So you typically don't want that. So I'm going to give it a name, Sarcona underscore text. Perfect. So now that when it renders out, it's going to be called Sarcona underscore text. Okay? This is very important because if something happens and I lose my file that rendered out, I don't have to re-render it out. I don't have to wait another 4 to 8 hours. I can just search the hard drive for this file. Okay? So your file name, what you want it to be called when it comes out. The image format, OpenEXR. This could be changed to TIFF if you would like. Most people don't use OpenEXR as far as beginners go. When you get into more advanced stuff, we use OpenEXR. So you can change that to TIFF because we want TIFFs to come out of here. Okay? Our frame animation extension. So right now it's set to use a single frame. When we go from Maya, we render it out, we bring that into After Effects. After Effects has to read these files. Right now it's going to render a single frame. So if I were to hit the actual let's do this render button, it would render out whatever frame I'm at. We're doing a sequence, so we want this name.number.extension. Okay? So what this will do is it'll output the name, which is Sarcona text, the number, which is whatever frame it's on, and then the extension, which is TIFF. Now if you choose one of the other ones from the list, After Effects will not like it, and After Effects will not like you, and it'll make you go through each one of those files and manually rename them so that it's name.number.extension. Okay? So if you have 120 files, how many times do you have to renumber stuff? 120 times. right? So yes, you don't want that to happen. So name.number.extension, perfect. Here's a preview up here of what it's going to look like. So sarcona_text.0001.tiff. And then it's going to do, the last frame is this one, .10.tiff. The frame padding, you can see, is just adding zeros to that list. Okay. Some software wants to have a pad to it. Okay. Have you ever seen a file list where it lists number 1 and then the next one on the list is number 10 and then it goes 11, 12, 13, 14 all the way to 19, and then it goes to 2 and then 20? You ever seen that before?
Oh yeah.
Yes. Okay. That's where padding comes in, because with padding there's no guessing. 0001 is the first one, 0002 is the second one. Okay. So typically 4 frame padding is typically enough. Unless you're rendering out 10,000 frames, that should be a good number. Scrolling down further, our start frame is 1. My end frame is 120. Okay, that should be pretty obvious what your start and end frame are. Renderable cameras. Right now I have 2 renderable cameras. I have perspective 1 that I'm rendering and perspective 2 that I'm rendering. So I would click on perspective 1, that chooses it. And then if I click on this again, there's a button on the bottom. Okay, add renderable camera. If I don't want to render 2 cameras, then you don't have to render 2 cameras. Okay, but I have 2, so I could render 2. If I don't want to, I can click the trash can and get rid of the other one. Again, this is an important thing to not only make sure that you've chosen the right cameras, but you've chosen only the right cameras. If you choose or leave the defaults, sometimes the defaults are set to like 4 or 5 cameras. Okay, it'll render out 4 or 5 cameras. You don't want that to happen. You want exactly what you want. Perspective 1, perspective 2, whatever yours are. Okay, our resolution is 960 by 540. That's going to be the same for every assignment that we do. All right, so this first tab is the common tab. It controls basically what is output. That's it, what is output. So our files, what they're going to be called, what their frame start and end is, which cameras are going to be rendering, and what the size of that is. That's what it's controlling. The next tab, which is quality, is controlling quality. It's pretty obvious. We have one slider here that we're going to adjust, which is the overall quality. And you can basically take that up to 2. For everything we're doing now, it's going to be fine. I want to test it. Every time you change something with quality, or you change something where you're just like, I need to test this first, test it. Okay? What we want to look for with quality is all that grain. Remember all those dots that we saw for the shadow and all the dots we saw with reflection? That should nearly be eliminated. Okay? We might still have some grain in there, but we don't want to totally eliminate it and cause us to have a 12-hour per frame render. So that looks like a lot of the grain is gone. It looks pretty smooth in this image. Okay, once it's done, we can use our viewer here to switch back to one of the older versions and take a look and see how much grain actually was there. And you can see how long this is going to take now that we have our quality up to 2. There we go. So 1:11 for this ball and this ground. So there's the grain before. Look at all the grain that's inside here. Look at all the grain that's inside this. Now if we go back, I mean, even I'm zoomed out obviously, but zooming in, there's very little grain inside here. Now there is, if you look, there is some spots where it's not perfectly smooth. That's fine, okay? When they work on a movie and they are going to do something digitally, what they do is they take their video, they take all the grain out of the video and they do whatever they have to do to it. They add their 3D object to it, and then they add the grain right back into it. Because the grain makes it look like video, because we're used to having grain in there. Okay? Now we're not used to having this much grain in there, because that obviously looks horrible. We want it to be nice and smooth and have just this subtle, just like you really have to look at it kind of grain. Now again, the projector is showing you something different that's on my screen. It actually looks a little bit smoother on mine. Yeah, about that-ish. Okay? It's about what I'm seeing. All right, so we're minimizing the grain. Now this number 2 could go up higher. We could put that up to 100 probably if we wanted to. But again, it's just going to take longer and longer and longer to render our stuff out. The lighting quality is another one. We could crank this up to if we had a specific spot. Right now in this class, we're not. Right now we're still playing, we're still learning the tools. So just 2 and 1 are going to be good, unless you get a crazy amount of grain, or unless you crank that up and you're still getting these like super grainy images. Okay, so that's it for that one. So we just cranked this overall quality up to 2, and we were good. And that's it. All these other tabs are stuff for advanced things that we are not going to be doing, but they're there. Okay. Under the rendering tab, there we go, or the hotbox. Remember, we have the hotbox. We go to render and we go to batch render option box. Inside here, we're picking our render threads. Okay. Remember, by default, it's set to 8. In this computer, there's 8 processors, but Maya does not like to always use them. So we uncheck this auto render threads. We tell it we have 12 processors, just trying to trick Maya, and then we batch render. Now what should happen is in our task manager, so I've right clicked, I've gone to the task manager, I've gone to processes, and I search inside here. I find Maya batch, there he is. And I watch the CPU, okay? Now this is very technical for artsy people, but the CPU here is the processor. That's what's doing all the work that we're rendering out. If that doesn't get above 30%, we need to close that by hitting this end process button, and then restart our renderer. So we go back to render. Come on. We go back to batch render. It's going slow because I'm rendering. And then we would set this higher, like to 16 maybe, and then maybe that would work. Maybe 8 would work. It all depends on how Maya feels that day, okay? So mine's at 97 right now, so I would leave it. I would let it do its work. I would right click in Maya, I would set my priority below normal so that I don't affect the person before after me. Come on, Maya. There we go. Okay, so now my priority is below normal, meaning that I can actually use my computer. Wow, that's a new one. I was unaware of that hotkey. I could just shake that and it would just bring stuff back.
I found that a while ago.
Yeah, you didn't let me know about it. All right, so now that it's rendering, it's going along. Down here on the bottom right, here's the progress of my rendering, okay? So I'm at 65% of frame number 1. So frame number 1 is still not out yet. Now we're at 70%. So you can see how slow this is going to go. So it literally might take 2 hours or 3 hours to render your stuff out. It might take 7 hours to render your stuff out. So 2 o'clock a week from today is not a good time to start rendering, okay? A good time to start rendering is today or Wednesday, or if you came into lab Friday or Saturday, if you're rendering from home, Sunday morning, okay? Those are good times to render. Monday is not a good time to render. If you do render here, we use these. You put that sign on your computer, and the person that comes in after you knows that you're rendering, and they won't shut off the computer, hopefully, okay? You just set it on your keyboard, and they know not to shut it off. Now, it does happen that computers crash. They accidentally shut it off. We do our best just to make sure that wherever it was, we start it back up, okay? So if this did crash at frame 40, I could go into my render settings, tell it that I want to start rendering at frame 40, and it would just pick right back up, okay? What? You can use skip frames too, or skip existing frames. That would work too. But what happens is, if you go, let's say you render from 1 to 40, okay? At frame 40, that one crashes. It may still read that frame 40 was rendered out, okay? So I always just ignore that and just do 40 to 120. All right. So while this is rendering, I'm going to go into After Effects, and I'm going to open up my Planet one, okay? So I'm going to show you how we can then take a rendered out sequence and actually make it into a movie. So under the project inside of After Effects, I double click inside here, and I go and I find my project. I go and find 2510, work, space, because that's the one I have rendered out, images, and then here, right there, is my sequence. So you see where it says Sarcona space .0001. Okay, that's my rendering out. That's something that's already finished rendering. And you'll see that I have inside here 120 different images. All right, every frame gets an image. So 120 frames, 120 images, there they are. So now I should be able to grab the first one, make sure that OpenEXR sequence is clicked or OpenTIFF sequence is clicked or whatever it is, and import. Okay, so there it is. So now I can just drag this down to here. And my background is set to red. Please don't crash. So I'm just setting my background back to black. There we go. And then when I hit play, there we go. Now I could, because this is After Effects and because I have transparency, I could go out there and find an image of space. Labeled for use with remodifications, yes. And that one looks good. Nothing crazy, just like some sort of background.
Glory be to Wikipedia.
It's always on Wikipedia. They're free images for us. Let's go here, here. And even though I'm not working in Maya, I like to keep everything together. So I'll put it in my source images. I'll go back to After Effects. And I'll find that image and just drag it down. There we go. So now I have a little, space scene or something in the background. It looks too big. It looks huge. So I'm going to scale it. So I hit S, and I can shrink it down. There we go. Okay. Now it's not animated. I could obviously animate that a little bit. Let's get a little fancy. Okay, so we're going to stay here. Let's see, I zoom into this. Yeah, so that should get bigger. So I'm going to go to my scale. I'm going to go to the end of this, and I'm just going to scale it up to maybe like 25%. That's probably too much. That's pretty good. Okay, so very quickly I was able to do that. Just kind of bring my rendering in, bring my image sequence in. We could do a whole bunch of other stuff too, okay? But for the first one, we're going to keep it very simple. As we progress in our assignments, we're going to progressively get harder and harder in what we're doing with this. Right now, it's just drop it in. We're good to go, okay? So if you want to do your space sequence, do your space sequence. It's not going to be turned in for a grade. It's just a fun one. And then once you're done with this part, okay, it's in After Effects. Now we need to get it out of After Effects. We're going to go to File, Export, and we're going to add it to the render queue. Just like in Maya, we did all of our work, and we set it to render, right? That's what we're going to do in After Effects. We did all our work. We're going to set it to render. We click on the word lossless that's in blue right here. And this is going to be what you're outputting. So in Maya, we outputted a TIFF sequence, okay? In After Effects, we're going to be outputting a QuickTime. Now, we don't want to just hit OK here because we have to output a certain QuickTime. So we click on Format Options, we click on Animation, and we choose H.264. Okay, H.264 is a compressor for QuickTime that allows us to see a really good quality movie at a low file size. All right, if we had audio, it would turn up. We don't. Hit OK. I'm going to go to the Not Yet Specified here for the name and give it a name. So I'm going to go to my P drive, Sarcona, 2510, work. This is space scene, so I'm going to go in space. And then under movies, so you have a movies folder, Sarcona space, perfect. And then I render this out. Okay, there's a render button right here. I click it, and now it's going to go through and take that sequence and put it into an actual QuickTime file. That QuickTime file could then be played pretty much on any computer, or uploaded to YouTube and then played on any computer or device. All right, so now if I go here to my P drive, I go to Sarcona, I go to 2510, work, space, movies. There it is. Okay, so here's my movie. Gorgeous. It's very nice, okay? So now when I turn this in, when you turn in any project, you're grabbing your whole project folder and turning that in. So I'm going to pretend that I'm turning in my space scene for this one. Okay, so I hit Control-C to copy it. I'm going to go to the Z drive. I'm going to go to the 2510. I'm going to go to the Sarcona folder. I'm going to go to the, I'll just say space turn in, even though you're not turning in the space one. And then you're going to paste it there, okay? So that's going to copy your files. Look how big this is, 2.16 gigabytes of storage for just that space scene, okay? Now you're going to clean some stuff out before we get into there, but I just want you to see what you're going to be turning in, and then we can kind of work a little bit backwards. I'll just hit cancel. We're going to pretend that we've already turned that in. I have to actually cancel it, copy it. Okay. So what I want you to do is I want you to delete all the stuff. Once it's copied, I don't need all these images. Okay. The images are pretty much useless to me because I would have the movie. You need the images to make the movie. I'm not making a movie. You are. So you can delete all the images. And that'll save you 23 megabytes. Now, under the scenes folder, I only need your very last scene. So in this case, my last scene is the solar system. So I could delete all the other scenes that are inside there. I need those. I'm going to undo that. Now in this one, I actually have other stuff. And that's where it was actually taking up the space is right there. Okay, so I would delete that too. All right. Now in your scene, when you do your title, everything should be labeled and organized. So when I click on your text, that should be labeled. Okay. So sphere, background. Oops. Come on. There it is. You only have 2 lights, so you typically have a key light, and then you would typically have a fill light. You might also have a rim light. I'm just going to name this one rim light just so you can see it. Okay. Now the easiest way to see that is in your outliner. If you go to your outliner, you can see all the stuff that's listed here, and you can label it right down the list. Okay. The top 4 things and the bottom 2 things you typically can't touch. Okay. You can't touch the top 4 cameras, and you can't touch these default sets. But everything else you should be able to rename. So here's my sphere. Here's my background. Here's my key light and my fill light. And my rim light. And then I have some other lights that are inside here too. Okay? So just go through, rename your stuff that's there. Also in your hypershade, window rendering editor's hypershade, I'm rendering, so it's going to take a long time. There you go. All my materials are listed. So you see my ball is labeled ball. That's my material for the ball. It's labeled as ball. My ground is labeled as ground. If I had 75 shaders in here, each one is labeled. Okay? So when I check these, I look at your organization. I look at your file to make sure that your outliner is nice and neat. Okay? There we go. I look at your hypershade to make sure your hypershade is nice and neat, that I know what all your stuff is called. So when I go in here, I can see what the ball is called, what the ground is called. Just like the other one, there's 3 of these you can't touch. Lambert 1, you cannot do anything with. You just leave that guy alone. Particle cloud, leave that guy alone too. And shader glow, leave that guy alone. Okay? Those 3 we don't touch, but everything else should be able to label. Okay? So when I get these in a week from today, I'm going to go into this folder here on the Z drive on 2510, Sarcona. I'm going to grab all of these things and I'm going to open them up. I'm going to look at how you have everything organized. I'm going to look at your movie and see what that looks like. I'm going to check for all the stuff I went over today. I'm going to check for your lights and your reflections and your labelings and everything to make sure that you're not missing any of those things. Because that's the stuff that's going to carry over into the next assignment and the next assignment and the next assignment, and then we're done. Okay? All right. So that's how you're going to render this thing out. And again, look at this, how slow this is going. I'm still on frame 3. Okay? Now this is rendering out perspective 2 and perspective 1 at the same time. So it is going like perspective 1, perspective 2, back and forth. So it's actually 6 frames it's rendered out. But still, it's going to take some time for this. Okay? Plan for this to take a long time. Don't wait until the day before it's due to start rendering this. I would render it out at the latest by Friday. Okay? Because if something happens where it crashes, anything, you have time. You have troubleshooting time. Yes, sir.
Like, when you render at home and stuff, is there any difference from here or anything? Except when your computer turns off, like,
Right. The only difference is you can monitor it better. So I like to render at home because I can just like set it up and just forget the computer and just leave it do its thing. Here, if you set it up right now, there's a class coming in after you, and they might need to render, and they'd have to shut your stuff down, or they have to move to a different computer, or whatever. Okay, so at home, you know where your computer is. You know you can watch it all the time. You can come back, like some people are here until 11 at night. You can come back right before you leave and then start your rendering. That way it has all night to render and all tomorrow until 5 o'clock to render, at least. Okay? So it's always good to kind of keep an eye on all that stuff because it's such an important thing. If it stops rendering, it stops, and you got to start it back over again. Mm-hmm.
Is it CPU intensive? Or
Yes. Right now it's crippling my station because it's rendering everything. That's why I took the priority down to below normal so that I can still navigate my OS. If this is set to normal, and never set it above normal or high or real time. Normal is the highest you want to go. If it's set to normal, it basically locks up my station. I can't do anything, okay, because it uses every single bit of it. There's also set Affinity, which is something like a last minute resort where I can free up 2 of my processors. Okay, so when you run Windows is going to use CPU 0 and 1 typically. So I can free those up so I can still run Windows, and Maya will use the other 6 processors to render on. But when we render, we just want everything, just like get it done so we can check it out. Right now it's at 37, 33. And it drops down and it comes back up and whatever. We just want to make sure it eventually gets up to 99. Okay. Another important thing to keep note of is where your files are going. You can see where my files are going. They're going into my Sarcona text logo images. If I did not set my project, file set project, remember that guy? If I set it to space, all my files would go into the space folder. If I set it to text logo, they'll all go into the text logo folder. So make sure you put it into the correct folder, okay? So that you can find them later. Because typically what happens is you render it out, 8 hours later you come back and say, I don't know where my files are. And then we have to dig around and find them. All right. Anything else? Okay.